Hi folks, in this video, I'm going to answer the question that I get all the time, which is how do I transfer transactions from one QuickBooks file into another QuickBooks file? Now, in this video, I'm going to focus on QuickBooks Online because QuickBooks Desktop would be a very different process, and I would save that for a different video. Now, there isn't an easy answer to this because there isn't like a built-in button or mechanism to copy files from one file into the other. Now, logically, you would think that should be easy. That should be available there. Both pieces of data would be contained within the QuickBooks ecosystem. Therefore, it should be easy. Well, long story short, it's not easy at all. It actually requires a third-party app, and there's several options, but I'm going to work on one. I'm going to show you one called SaaSant. We'll talk about that briefly. And that's the app that we're going to use to extract the data from one file and then to the other. Now, before we jump in it, I also want you to think about the context. In some cases, you want to get data from one file into the other, maybe because you mistakenly put it in the wrong file and you don't want to start all over from zero and enter it on the other one. Maybe the old file is a mess and you're not really going to keep it, and you're trying to maybe export selected pieces of data in which you would need to export the data, clean it up in Excel, and then import it. So the context in which the underlying reasons why you want to transfer the data does matter, and you want to think long and hard about that first because that does affect the workflow. Let me show you an example just so you kind of get an idea how this works. I am on QuickBooks Online now. This is the source file. This is where I want to get data from. I open the balance sheet just to kind of illustrate the concept here. And let's say I want to get transactions that have affected one specific account. So I just want to get transactions that were in one bank account, and I want to transfer just those into my QuickBooks, onto my secondary QuickBooks Online account. So I'm just going to click on the total dollar value of the bank account just so you can see a couple of transactions on the screen. And let's say what you're seeing here is effectively what I want to transfer to the other file. First, before we get started, very important, I'm going to sort these by transaction type. And the reason for that is because the way imports and exports work, they're all by transaction type. So you kind of have to do them in phases. So for example, you see we got a couple of deposits here. We got a couple of expenses. We have a couple of payments. We have a couple of transfers. Every transaction type has its own little world of nuances, and I can't cover them all in this video. I'm going to show you just with expenses, just so you can see how complex the process could get. So it's not a walk in the park. Let's just call it that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into apps. So on the left navigation bar, click on apps. I'm going to search for an app called SaaSant. So SaaSant. And there's SaaSant, and I'm going to click on that. And this app costs, I believe, let me click on pricing real quick. Obviously, this is subject to change when you watch this video. This costs $10 per company file, $25 for 3 company files. So for example, if you're going to use 2 company files, the source, the destination, and stop using it, you probably really only need to pay 10 and 10, 20 bucks for that month. And hopefully you'll be done transferring within a month. So that would be the total cost that will cost out of pocket. Again, there's no built-in tools to doing this. You have to use the app. This app maker didn't pay me for this video. They didn't push me to do this. I'm not getting anything in exchange. This is the actual tool that I use. So I'm recommending them because that's really the least expensive thing that I've seen out there to be able to do this particular function. Anyway, so we're going to click on Get App Now, and we're going to connect the app into QuickBooks Online. I already connected the app previously, so normally ask you for a couple of prompts. You go through that process. At some point, you pull your credit card for your billing information, and then the app loads up. So once the app loads up, I'm going to choose on the left navigation bar if I'm going to do an import, a delete, or an export. Again, this one is the source file, so we're going to do an export. So I'll click on export on the left navigation bar, and then it's going to ask me what entity really means transaction type. I don't know why they call it entity. That's just confusing, but it's entity is transaction type. And as we mentioned earlier, let me go back into QuickBooks and close this app window. And let's see if I can go back to that report that we had open. That way okay, there we go. And we're going to resort this again, resort this by transaction type just for the context. So full understanding of what's going on. I'm going to run the report again. And it's these expenses that we're going to export first. So these are the transactions you're seeing here is roughly about 10 transactions or so. So we go back into SASANT here. Entity, we're going to hit expenses. That's the transaction type. Date type. So typically we're going to pick a date range. When they were created, sometimes as useful. When they were last updated, sometimes as useful. But typically is the actual transaction date that matters. So I'm going to pick a search by transaction date. I'm going to pick in the date range January 1st, 2021. Because let's say that's the starting point in which I want to bring all the transactions in. And I won't put anything on the ending date. Or I could put something on the ending date. So it's really up to you on what you want to do this. If you leave that blank, it will bring everything from that date. Now, when I click on customize, there's a couple of options here like ranges and that sort of thing. None of this stuff will be useful for the context of this. So none of the information in the customize is valuable anyway. So I'm going to click on search, and that should take about a minute or so, probably even less. And then we'll show up on the screen the list of all the transactions that are expenses within that date range, which is the filters that I actually use. So there they are on the screen. You see them. It kind of looks like a spreadsheet. It looks like a grid. There's all the fields that could potentially be exported. Notice that on this column here that says Bank CC Cash Account, if I scroll down, we're going to see transactions coming out of a Visa card, out of a PayPal. And if you remember originally, we actually, I'm going to go back here for a second, we said we only wanted transactions. I'm going to pull up the balance sheet again. We only wanted transactions coming from that one bank account, that one source bank account. So in here, I would have to run the filter, put is equal to, and put 5150 or whatever the bank account is. There you go, 5150. That way I filter it on SASANT before I do the download or the export. Because if I don't filter it, then I have to do the filtering in Excel. And as much time as I can save by doing the pre-filters in SASANT, probably the best idea. So I'm going to go ahead and click on download here on the bottom right. And that's going to download an Excel file, a CSV file in my computer. I'm going to go ahead and bring it open here so you can see it. I will zoom it in so you can see the data. And there's a whole bunch of columns. You're going to see a bunch of columns with data, obviously, depending on the line items that you have and the type of data that you have, whether you have classes, locations, items, all that stuff will come in here. This data file is pretty light in terms of the type of data that you have. And we have exactly 10 rows here of data. So let's say this is what I want to bring in. One thing I want you to notice is we got the source account here. This is going to matter because that needs to match on the other company file. We got the payee. That's going to matter because those vendors need to exist in the other company file. And then we have the account category from the chart of accounts. That matters because that also needs to match in the other company file. In the event that I was using maybe products and services, which is not being used in this particular data set, those items or products and services would need to match, classes, locations, all those things we need to match for this to work. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and save this. So I'm just saving the CSV file. It's in my computer. And then I'm going to get out of SASANT completely. I'm going to log out and I'm going to go into QuickBooks and then I'm going to go into the destination file. So the file where I want to export the data into. So I went ahead and opened my other QuickBooks file. For some context, I'm also going to go into the balance sheet over here just to kind of show you. And you will notice that in the balance sheet, there is no bank account called Chase 5150 or bank account 5150 or whatever. And what I want to bring in is those transactions from the other QuickBooks file that are now in Excel into here. So I'm going to go into apps the same way I did on the other file. And I'm going to download or install or connect that SASANT application as well. So I click on Get App Now. And once I'm in the SASANT connected to the new file, this Garcia Enterprises, where I'm copying data into, I'm going to click on a new import here on the left-hand side. I'm now doing an import. I'm going to click on Browse File, and I'm going to go look for that file in my computer, and then click on Open. And then I'm going to click on Submit. That's going to load or import the data into SASANT for now. Then it's going to ask you what type of transactions are these, what kind of lists are these, and these are expenses. If you remember, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be transaction type by transaction type. Then you're going to go into the mapping screen. Now, this mapping screen could be a little bit confusing, but good news, the automated mapping system, when you do an import from an export, You don't have to do any mapping. It does all the mapping automatically. So that part is pretty amazing. Then I'm going to click here where it says preview mapping, just to kind of give you a general idea. This will tell you which field inside of the transaction that you're working with, so expenses in this case, which one has which label in the Excel file. So when you open up that Excel file again, here we go. Let's zoom that in. And you see a field up here that says, for example, memo, right? And then you come back in here into the cheat sheet, you can see exactly where memo is. So you can check, you can do a sort of a visual mapping of the data in your Excel to the physical form in which the data is going to come into. That should make it really, really easy to kind of understand what's happening with the Excel file into QuickBooks. Now I'm going to click here where it says review. And what this is going to do is going to do sort of a quick check to see what's going on in terms of the data that came in. So the review will now give me a spreadsheet of the data that was imported. And then once I just go through it, I can also do filters in here, which is pretty nice. So if I didn't do the filtering originally in the SASANT or cleaned up Excel manually, I can do the filter here as well prior to import. Now, if you click on settings here in the top, you will have a couple of options here, and you want to just kind of go through them and see what different options you have. And it just is a more like vendor lookup, customer lookup, item lookup, automatic item creation settings, that sort of thing. I'm not going to go through with them, just to let you know, because when you're importing, you will run into little issues and situations. And we are going to, in this specific video, to show you in the real world what happens, right, when you try to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on upload. I say I'm ready to go. I want to upload those expenses into my new, from my old file into my new file. Click on upload. I'm going to click here where it says upload anyway, and then we're going to let it do its thing. Now, I'm telling you, I know for a fact this is going to give me an error just because I have experience in this, but I want to show you what the errors look like, because this is what's going to happen in the real world. And this is why this is not an easy thing. I'm going to click on show results, and we're going to see the errors that came in. And basically all the transactions, 100% had error. So we go through the errors here. So the first one says no account information found for given account Chase 5150 checking. So what's happening here is I'm going to go back into QuickBooks, and then I'm going to go into the chart of accounts. Is that account called checking 5150 doesn't exist in QuickBooks. So there's no way for SASAN to know where is it going to dump those transactions in it. So you got two choices. One, if a different transaction exists, for example, or a different account rather exists, and it's this one, checking account 2, then I change the Excel file originally to say checking account 2 instead of 5150. That's an option. Okay, assuming that those are the facts of the matter, right? That account is actually that one. So I would just paste that in here and spread it through the entire spreadsheet. And then once I do the import, it will try to do it again and probably give me an error of some sort. Let's go through that route. I'm going to click on save here, and let's go back into SASANT. Then I'm going to click on new import again, because there's a new file that I modified in Excel. I have to click here where it says clear uploads, and I have to upload the file again because I modified the underlying Excel CSV file. So I'm going to select the file again, click on open, then click on submit. Okay, then it's going to ask me what's the entity type or transaction type. So I'm going to click on expenses again. So basically doing everything over from scratch. Then I'm going to go import into QuickBooks. Again, I'm hoping that that's the only error that it had. Let's see what happens. It turns out, I'm going to click upload again. It turns out that it's going to give me another error. So let's see what happens. Okay, so there's an error. I'm going to click on show results. And now I should get a different error message. And it says, okay, they give an account name, which is actually your expense account, your expense transaction, called office expenses, column merchant account fees. That doesn't exist in your chart of accounts. Now let's double check that. Let's go in chart of accounts. Let's type merchant fees. It doesn't exist at all. So I have to create the account. So I'm going to go to new and click on expenses and create an account called merchant transaction fees. I'm going to copy that name for a minute just so I can show you. and I'm gonna click on save and close. So now that the account is created, then I have to open up that spreadsheet again, and now I have to change the underlying expense account for all these transactions in which are using an account that's not in the new file. So I'm gonna just kind of paste and override these, and now let's just do it for all of these here. So only the ones that give me an error, or at least the first ones I looked at, we're gonna have the same error with utilities and personal expenses. Let's just double check to show you. So notice I'm gonna scroll down here. Personal expenses, that doesn't exist either. And we have utilities somewhere. Probably utilities does exist. Or let's see where it is. There it is. So utilities, disposal, and waste fees doesn't exist either. So I'm having the same issue basically with all the accounts, because my chart of accounts in my new QuickBooks file doesn't match the chart of accounts on my old QuickBooks file. And this is normal if the two files have active data. If I was starting from scratch, I would probably export that chart of accounts, import the chart of accounts, and not have this error. So I hope that makes sense. Now, in addition to that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up that spreadsheet, and instead of sending everything to these checking account 2, which I did it for an example, I'm actually going to create a new account called checking 5150. So I'm going to go in there and kind of overwrite that, and then I'm going to go into QuickBooks Online and create the new account, just so I don't confuse the stuff that's already in the other account, and call this one checking 5150. Let me copy it from Excel. That way we get the exact same text. So we got checking 5150. Let's put that in there. Click on save and close. So now I should have that account in my chart of accounts by itself with a zero balance. And also, let's just go back to the merchant transaction fees. Okay, just double checking that that's there to make sure we're not going to have that error. So I'm going to go back into Saasant. I'm going to click on new import again. I'm going to have to start all over because in my spreadsheet, I made a change and I have to re-export the changed, or the spreadsheet with the changes. So I'm going to click on save, close that. I'm going to go to new import, click on clear uploads again, just so we kind of start from zero. Click again on browse file. We're going to select that spreadsheet, click on open, click on submit, click on expenses, and import to QuickBooks. So we know we fixed the source account, and we also fixed the expense account that we had. So at least those 8 transactions, except for those 2 that had different accounts, those should go through. Let's see what happens here when this finishes. There you go. So we got 8 transactions that went through, 3 that had errors. Let's click on show results. And I guess there was 2 transactions and a blank one. Okay, we'll leave the blank one be. That's not an issue at all. But these 2 transactions didn't go through, again, because the expense categories were in there. Now, we did have some that went through. As you notice up here, it says total 11, success 8, error 3. If I click on the tab where it says success records, we can actually see them in there. And I can actually click on each one of these, which is really, really cool. Click on any of these from Saasant, and it will open up the window straight into QuickBooks, so you can see the underlying transaction that was created. So there it is. That's the transaction that we actually imported. Now I'm going to close that, and I'm going to go into the balance sheet so we can kind of come full circle with this concept. Go back into the balance sheet, and we should now see checking account 5150. Click on that $135, and you will notice, let me do all dates here, click on run. You will notice that at least those transactions were imported. So that's it. That's the process. Now, the conversation gets a little bit more nuanced when it comes to, as I mentioned earlier, importing customer payments, because, what invoices do we match them to? So if you're going to import invoices and customer payments, you kind of have to do them in order. Invoices first, payments later. Now, what happens if we have bills and bill payments? Same thing. We got to import the bills first, the bill payments later. Again, every transaction type, it's its own import, and every transaction type could have its own little nuances. I did expenses because that was the easiest one. So you know exactly what the process looks like. Now, is this something you can do on your own? I think so. Can you hire a professional to do that? That's optional too. In my firm, when we do projects like these, even though it seems pretty easy because there's so many little curveballs this can throw at you, this is going to cost a couple $1,000s. Sometimes it's even cheaper and less expensive to reconstruct the books manually. So depending on your situation, if you have a lot of invoices with details, yeah, that's worth it to import. But if you have a bunch of like expenses without details, just one expense account, you have a bunch of deposits going straight to sales, no details, line item in issues or inventory or anything like that, then it might be worth it to just enter them manually or recreate them. But you know what the entire process looks like. QuickBooks Online, SaaSant, it's fairly inexpensive. It's just a matter of practicing and getting it going. Anyway, I hope you liked that video, and I'll see you on the next one.